My name is Kaylin Thorne, and for nearly 15 years, I was the quiet architect behind the financial systems at Carrick and Belden, a defense contractor where silence was rewarded more than truth. I never cared for politics. I cared about accuracy, about doing things right. But when I noticed the numbers didn't add up, when money started vanishing into invisible hands, I did what I always do. I followed the data. I just didn't expect it to lead me straight into a buried secret, and a warning no one wanted to hear. I'd reviewed payroll reports every quarter for over a decade, but that Tuesday morning, something felt off. It was subtle. A name I didn't recognize listed under the R&D department. A name with no security badge, no login activity, and no completed onboarding forms. I double-checked the employee ID, flagged as active. Salary, $132,000. Title, Strategic Advisor. Yet no one had ever introduced this person. No email, no voicemail greeting, nothing. I clicked past it, chalking it up to a clerical error. But another popped up, and another. A $7,000 bonus issued to someone in temporary logistics with no associated hours worked. A reimbursement for a conference that didn't exist. By the fifth anomaly, a chill crept across my spine. I'd built parts of this ledger system myself. I knew where the bones were buried, and these weren't typos. These were deliberate. I opened a private spreadsheet and began tracking every questionable line item I could find. 22 by lunch, 41 by the end of the day. And yet, no one else seemed to notice. That night, I skipped dinner. I was supposed to visit my sister at the hospital, but the billing notice I'd received that morning kept replaying in my head. $14,970 for the latest round of chemo. I needed this quarter's bonus. Desperately. The next morning, I found Riley, our youngest analyst, standing beside the printer with a puzzled look. "Hey, Kaylin," she said, flipping through a stack of reports. "Have you ever seen someone listed on payroll who doesn't show up on the system roster?" I froze. She had found it too. "Just once or twice," I said carefully. "Why do you ask?" She shrugged. "I thought maybe it was a test record or something. But then there were 5. I forced a neutral smile. Good catch. By the following Monday, Riley was no longer with our team. She'd been reassigned to assist with external branding in the marketing division. No one said why. That's when my suspicion hardened into something colder. I wasn't imagining things. There was a pattern here, a deliberate one, and someone didn't want it seen. There's a strange kind of itch that happens when you know something's wrong. But you can't yet prove it. It sits just behind your ribs, somewhere between instinct and obsession. That's exactly where I was. The morning after Riley was reassigned, her quiet exit only confirmed what I already suspected. Someone was trying to keep those names buried, and I wasn't going to let that happen. Back at my desk, I opened a secure shell into our legacy archive system, the one I'd helped code during the first overhaul 7 years ago. No one used it anymore, not since the new interface came in. But I remembered every backdoor and override path like muscle memory. I had built the scaffolding that held the company's data backbone in place. If there was something hidden, it would be here. Bypassing the visual GUI, I accessed the raw ledger tables manually. It didn't take long to find the inconsistencies again. This time stored under an innocuous file labeled Old Comp Temp. I opened it. There it was. A second ledger, one that didn't show up on the official payroll reports. The formatting was messier, crude even, but the figures were unmistakable. Alternative salaries, private disbursements, off-cycle bonuses, nearly $4, $6 million in payments not reflected in the main system. Line by line, I scanned the entries. Some went back 2 years. Others were as recent as last week. It was like peeling back wallpaper and discovering rot beneath. No approval chains, no audit logs, just raw transactions dumped into the shell with brief notations. Exec support. Strategic family hire. Offshore retainer. My pulse quickened. I wasn't just looking at lazy accounting. This was something far more deliberate. I expanded the metadata fields, curious who last modified the entries. Most were anonymized, until I hit one that hadn't been scrubbed. A transaction logged at 2:47 a.m., tied to a user ID I didn't recognize, L. Mirren Admin 12. I cross-checked it with the internal directory. Lauren Mirren, executive assistant to CFO Daniel Pierce, hired just 6 months ago. I blinked. No one in that role should have admin-level permissions, let alone access to financial systems. And yet there it was. She had signed off on 8 figures worth of untraceable funds. I sat back in my chair, mind racing. Either she was being used as a pawn, or she was in on it. Neither answer gave me comfort. As I stared at the screen, one thought kept echoing in my head. Who else knew? And more importantly, how long had they been hiding this? I knew I had to copy the file. I plugged in my encrypted drive, heart pounding as the transfer bar crawled forward. It felt like stealing from a vault I'd helped build. But curiosity was no longer just a feeling. It had become a responsibility. Because now, I wasn't just someone with questions. I was someone with evidence. The moment I discovered Lauren Mirren's admin credentials tied to the second ledger, I knew I couldn't ignore it. But I also wasn't ready to blow it up. Not yet. I wasn't some crusader looking to bring the company down. I'd worked here for almost 15 years. I'd trained 3 entire finance teams. I believed in fixing things from the inside when possible. And this, I thought, still could be. So instead of raising alarms, I gave them a chance. Over the next 2 days, I combed through every anomalous transaction. I verified timestamps, copied metadata, and double-checked every detail against our official reports. What I had wasn't a suspicion anymore, it was a pattern. Misallocations, ghost salaries, anonymous disbursements. But I still held on to the idea that maybe it was a system error. Maybe someone had authorized those payments for the wrong cost centers. Maybe the assistant was just a proxy login. I crafted the memo late one night in my home office, the desk light casting long shadows across my notes. The tone was deliberate, cautious, non-accusatory, just data and process. Subject: preliminary review request, compensation ledger inconsistencies. Hi Ken. While reviewing legacy system data, I came across several compensation entries that don't appear to match current payroll documentation. I've attached a summary spreadsheet, unmapped entries, showing what may be duplicate records or out-of-process bonuses. Could be a reporting misalignment, but worth a second look to be safe. Please advise whether you'd like me to forward this to finance or keep the review within systems. Happy to assist further. Best. Kaylin. I read it twice before clicking send. Then I closed my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and exhaled. I had done the responsible thing, the right thing. The next morning, I walked into the office with something close to optimism. No fireworks, no righteous anger, just a quiet belief that integrity still mattered, that someone would see the memo and take it seriously. By noon, there was no reply. By 5 o'clock, still nothing. I told myself it was normal. Ken probably hadn't even opened the attachment yet. Finance was likely backlogged with month-end reports. People were busy. The second day passed in similar silence. At lunchtime, I ran into Ken by the break room coffee machine. I smiled. Hey, did you get my note? He blinked, nodded once, and said, Yeah, saw it. Then he turned and walked away without another word. No questions, no acknowledgement, no follow-up. A strange heaviness settled in my chest. That afternoon, an automated HR email pinged into my inbox. I almost dismissed it, until I read the subject line, Updated Compensation Structure, Q4 Incentives. I clicked it open. Inside was a single paragraph informing me that, due to departmental restructuring and realignment of role expectations, my quarterly bonus had been recalibrated, The amount, zero. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Just 2 days ago, my $6,000 bonus had already been projected and approved. This wasn't recalibration. It was erasure. There was no explanation, no conversation, no call. I logged into the compensation portal to confirm. The field read, "Not applicable for this cycle." That's when it hit me. This wasn't a coincidence. This was an answer. A cold, calculated reply to a warm, professional warning. My hands curled into fists, not out of rage, out of restraint. I felt the same sting I'd felt when my sister cried after reading her latest medical bill. $1,470 for one round of treatment. We had made it work so far, barely. But I had counted on that bonus to cover the next one. Now, it was gone, silently, strategically. I printed out my memo, folded it once, slid it into the back sleeve of my notebook. I needed to remember that I'd tried, that I gave them a chance to do the right thing before I ever considered doing anything else. And as I packed up that evening, I didn't know yet what would come next. But I knew one thing for certain. Hope, when ignored, doesn't disappear. It hardens. The day after my bonus vanished without explanation, I arrived at the office to find a cardboard box sitting on my desk. Inside it were my framed photo of my sister, my old employee recognition plaque, and the ceramic mug I'd used for 11 years. My workstation had already been wiped. My nameplate was gone. A cheerful woman from HR hovered nearby, smiling a little too brightly. "Kaylin, good morning. We've reassigned your role to internal support, downstairs on the second floor. It's part of a broader realignment initiative." There was no meeting, no conversation, no thank you. Just relocation, disguised as strategy. I wheeled my box through the hallway like a ghost passing through her own past. No one made eye contact. The walk from the analytics wing to internal support felt like a mile long. My new space was at the end of a dim hallway, just outside the tech support room. Next to the communal printer, no windows. A plastic chair with a stiff back. The desk still smelled faintly of whiteboard cleaner and someone else's cheap cologne. Once, I had an ergonomic seat, 3 monitors, and a view of the city. Now I had a blinking ceiling light and a wall that hummed with the sound of old ductwork. They hadn't fired me. They had simply erased me. I sat down and stared at the login screen. My name still worked. My system permissions were now limited, view only in most analytics folders. I was allowed to watch the house I built, but never touch it again. That's when I heard her laugh. From upstairs, 2 floors up. I recognized the voice from the all-hands call the week before. Bright, youthful, performative, Emma Belden, 26, fresh MBA, new Director of Data Innovation, and also the CEO's niece. I had never met her until that week. She wore heels she couldn't quite walk in, called dashboards brand stories, and once asked a coworker if cloud data meant we don't need hard drives anymore. Later that morning, she appeared at my door with a phone in one hand and a reusable straw in the other. "Hey, Kaylin, I'm so glad you're still here," she beamed. "I've heard amazing things about you. Quick question, where do we plug in the color-coded data system, the mapping thingy?" I blinked. "Do you mean the forecasting model?" She lit up. "Yes, that. Wow, you really know your stuff." I gave her the answer, short and neutral. She nodded rapidly and bounced back upstairs. I sat there for a long moment, staring at my screen. She had taken my office, my title, my department, and now she was asking me how to operate the very system I designed. It wasn't just insulting, it was calculated. 3 days later, she emailed me. Subject, quick format check, need for presentation. "Hey, Kaylin, can you take a quick peek at this spreadsheet? Just need to make sure it's clean before next week's investor deck. Theax." I opened the attachment without thinking. The file was named Exec Package, Comp, Keep, List, .xlsx. My heart slowed as I scrolled. It wasn't an investor document. It was a financial worksheet listing compensation details, retention bonuses, salary figures, executive perks, all categorized under a column labeled Strategic Familial Integration. And Emma's name was right at the top. Base salary, $145,000 retention incentive, $75,000. Notes, approved by DP, retain for long-term family alignment. DP, Daniel Pierce, the CFO. The next few rows listed other names: nephews, spouses, girlfriends, all tied to leadership. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking in time with my pulse. She hadn't meant to send this to me. She must have clicked the wrong name. I saved a copy to my personal drive. Quietly, without a word. Then I stood up, walked down the hall, and leaned against the wall. Not to cry, not to scream, just to breathe. They hadn't just replaced me, they'd humiliated me, and they thought I'd stay quiet. After Emma's email, after the spreadsheet that confirmed what I already knew in my gut. I didn't go home. I stayed late, later than I had in years, not out of duty, not to finish a task, but because I couldn't bring that weight home to my sister. She didn't need the stress, not now, not while her body was fighting poison just to buy a few more months. The office was mostly empty by 6:30. The humming lights overhead flickered in predictable intervals. I microwaved a sandwich I'd brought but forgotten to eat. It came out dry and overcooked, the edges hard. I ate it anyway, sitting at my desk in the corner like an exile. Outside the windows I no longer had access to. Dusk crept over the parking lot, one by one. Taillights flared and vanished into the distance. I was alone in a place I used to love. I took a deep breath and opened my screen. I didn't have access to the primary payroll interface anymore, but I still had legacy retrieval permissions for archived system logs. It was a loophole, one I'd coded myself, years ago, to ensure version tracking in case of audit. I didn't know what I was looking for. Exactly. Maybe just reassurance. Maybe a trace that what had happened to me, my sudden bonus removal, my relocation, wasn't malicious, just bad timing. I wanted to believe that. I navigated backward through the past 4 fiscal years, running a comparative script I'd written for the finance team ages ago. I filtered by employee ID, mine. At first, everything looked fine. Salaries consistent, bonuses logged and aligned with documentation. But as I reached mid-Q2 of the previous year, something changed. The base salary figure dropped. Not by much, about $750 per month, but it was consistent, silent, and completely unannounced. There was no corresponding email, no HR form, no explanation. It was marked in the changelog as payroll type, SRX03, silent reclass. I blinked. SRX03 wasn't a standard payroll code. It wasn't in any manual I'd ever written or reviewed. I checked the entry metadata. The change had been executed by a masked system user tied to the financial controller's backend ID. They had cut my salary over a year ago and never told me. I stared at the screen as the weight of it settled. All this time, while I'd worked weekends, taken on overflow projects, led compliance mapping, I'd been quietly demoted in dollars, if not in title. The company had made a choice about my worth and never said it out loud. I leaned back, the silence pressing in from all sides. This place used to feel like home. I had spent 14 years here, believing in process, in data, in doing things right. I remembered the first day I walked through these doors, suit too stiff, resume in a leather folder I couldn't afford, heart pounding with ambition. I had coded half the systems they still use today. I had trained people who were now directors. I had stayed late, worked holidays, fixed broken integrations from hotel rooms during family funerals. And now, I was eating stale bread in a chair without back support. Looking at proof that I'd been quietly devalued, financially and personally, for more than a year. But I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I copied the log file, saved it to my encrypted drive, labeled it plainly, SRX Personal, Undisclosed Adjustment. I closed my laptop, placed the sandwich wrapper in the trash, and stood. There was a kind of quiet that lives only in moments like these. Not peace, not grief, just stillness. The moment before a decision becomes irreversible. I glanced once more at the dark hallway beyond the glass door. I used to belong here. Now, I belonged to the truth. After everything I'd seen, everything I'd lost, the bonus, the salary cut, the demotion, I still gave them one last chance. I scheduled a quiet meeting with Ken for 9 a.m. I told myself this wasn't a confrontation. It was a conversation, a professional check-in, a chance to right the ship before it completely sank. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe the errors were buried in bureaucracy. Maybe, just maybe, someone in this place still cared about doing the right thing. I brought printouts, highlighted and annotated. I organized my points clearly. The second ledger entries, the retention incentives marked for familial alignment, my own salary adjustment logged under an unapproved payroll code. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even emotional. Just thorough. Ken arrived 2 minutes late, coffee in hand, Bluetooth still blinking in his ear. Appreciate you making time, I began. I wanted to flag a few things I've discovered, privately, before any misunderstandings get baked in. I handed him the folder. He didn't open it. Instead, he stared at the table like it was a script he'd already read. I continued anyway. There are discrepancies in compensation. I cross-checked entries and access logs. One employee, Lauren Mirren, has back-end privileges beyond her scope. There's also an undocumented reduction in my own salary dating back to last year. If this was an oversight, I just want clarity. Ken's eyes stayed fixed on the coffee cup between us. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm, too calm. This isn't your lane. Kaylin. I blinked. You're not in finance. You're not in compliance. You're in support. You were moved for a reason. I need you to let this go. I kept my voice steady. I built this system. If it's being misused, if people are being overpaid, underpaid, or misrepresented, it is my lane. That's when he looked at me. Really looked at me. You've been with the company a long time. You're smart. But you're letting emotion cloud your role. There's no malice here, just structure. And frankly, you're not seeing your job clearly anymore. He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. If you're feeling overwhelmed, I can loop in HR for support, he added, like it was an afterthought. No, I said quietly. That won't be necessary. As he walked out, I remained seated, the folder untouched on the table between us. It didn't need to be read, it just needed to be dismissed. The next morning, I arrived at 7:40 a.m., like always, logged into my terminal, or tried to. Access denied. I entered my credentials again. Access denied. I checked my email on my phone. Session expired. When I tried to refresh, your account has been disabled. Slack? You have been removed from this workspace. I opened our internal resource dashboard. Just white screen. No links, no tools, no trace. They hadn't fired me. They'd simply turned me off. No explanation, no warning, no HR meeting, just silence and erasure. I walked over to the IT desk. Morning, I said, forcing a smile. I think my access got wiped. Could be a system issue? The guy barely looked up. Yeah. I was told to route you to ops. They'll handle it. Was there a ticket? He paused. No, just a note. Back at my desk. I sat down slowly, the room spinning a little. By 8:30, people were filtering in. A few glanced my way, but no one said anything. I saw a junior analyst, a kid I'd mentored, walk past with headphones in. He saw me. then pretended not to. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a system update. This was a lockout. A deliberate, silent exile. I pulled out my phone and stared at the background photo. My sister and me. 2 summers ago, smiling beside a lake. Before the diagnosis. Before the chemo. Back when life felt linear. I'd played by every rule, stayed loyal, kept quiet, believed in the chain of command. And this was the reward. Invisibility. They didn't fire me because that would leave a paper trail. They didn't confront me because that would mean admitting I had a point. No. They erased me because that's what cowards do when truth becomes inconvenient. I sat there for another 10 minutes, watching my blank screen, thinking only one thing. If truth gets you silenced, then silence is part of the lie. I sat in my car for nearly an hour after they shut me out of the system. The sun had set. The parking lot was almost empty, and my phone had gone silent, like the company had cut not just my access, but my existence. But they hadn't taken everything. In my bag was a small, black external hard drive, one I used only for emergency system backups back when I was still trusted. It wasn't connected to the company anymore, but it held keys they didn't remember I had. If they thought locking me out would stop me, they'd clearly forgotten who built the bones of their system. That night, I drove to the public library and found a quiet corner desk. I logged in through a secure VPN and opened my personal laptop, the drive whirred to life in my hands, like an old ally waking up. I accessed the shellcode for the legacy backend, code I had personally written 8 years ago. There it was, the back door. A mirrored gateway, hidden but functional, created during a server migration test, and never decommissioned. I'd left it there as a redundancy, never thinking I'd be the one who needed it. Within minutes, I was in. The full archive, 5 years' worth of payroll metadata, bonus schedules, approval logs, and internal transfers, was still there, unfiltered, unpolished, and finally, visible again. I didn't waste time. I began organizing the data, creating a visual map of every questionable financial trail I'd previously glimpsed but hadn't had the scope to track. I used a data visualization tool to highlight patterns: red for unexplained bonuses, yellow for family member hires, blue for offshore payments. The screen came alive with lines, branches, and clusters of transactions. Names appeared again and again: Emma Belden, Lauren Mirren, CFO Daniel Pierce. But more than just individuals. It was the system itself that had been rigged to favor a select few. Dozens of bonuses were issued outside of audit cycles. Retention incentives were granted with no HR documentation. Over 4.2 million had moved into accounts flagged as strategic allocations, several routed offshore. One transfer stood out: $2.2 million sent to a Cayman Islands account. Signed off by Lauren Mirren, an executive assistant with no financial authority. It was a web. And it wasn't sloppy, it was intentional. I saved my progress and exported the map as a secure, read-only PDF. Labeled it Greed Map V1. As I stepped outside the library, a familiar voice called my name. Kaylin? I turned. It was Janelle, an old colleague from HR I hadn't seen in months. She looked around before approaching, her voice low and urgent. I shouldn't be here, she said. But I had to warn you. They're drafting your termination papers. I blinked. For what? They're calling it a breach of protocol, unauthorized system access, whistleblower intent, whatever they need it to be. I stared at her, jaw tight. How do you know this? I saw the prep doc on Ken's desk. They're just waiting for legal to greenlight it. I paused. Why are you telling me? Her eyes softened. Because I know you. You trained me when no one else would. And I know you're not the problem here. But these people, they'll bury you if you let them. I nodded slowly. I appreciate it, really. Be careful, Kaylin, she said, backing away. They won't play fair. I watched her disappear into the darkness, Her warning didn't scare me. It clarified something I hadn't quite named until now. I wasn't doing this to get my job back. I was doing it because no one else would. Later that night, at my kitchen table, I stared at the map again. It wasn't just lines and colors. It was a blueprint of betrayal, one transaction at a time. I created 2 encrypted copies, stored them on separate drives, and labeled them clearly. I added digital fingerprints to verify authenticity. Then I zipped them and locked them with a passphrase only I knew. For the first time in weeks, my hands stopped trembling. I wasn't alone anymore. I had proof. After everything, after the erased login, the quiet exile, the whispered warning from Janelle, I didn't panic. I didn't rage. I simply planned. Sitting at my kitchen table that night, the map of financial corruption still glowing on my laptop, I felt no fear, no more disbelief, only precision. It was the kind of mental state I entered back when I used to troubleshoot system failures at 3 in the morning, running on stale coffee and deadlines. But this time, the system failure wasn't technical, it was ethical, and I wasn't fixing it. I was preparing for its collapse. I opened a clean browser window and created a private investment account. Separate from my personal banking, no shared logins, no attached ID beyond what was legally required. I chose a platform with customizable options tracking and historical volatility metrics, tools most employees at Carrick and Belden had never even heard of. Then I studied the company's stock performance. 3 months of steady growth, investor optimism, positive press, the illusion of progress. But I knew what lived underneath. The fake consultants, the shadow payroll, the family members on retainer, the offshore contracts masked as IT services. And when that kind of rot goes public, stock doesn't dip, it dives. I purchased long-dated put options, contracts that would increase in value if the stock price plummeted. I spread them across multiple expiration dates, each one timed to ripple after a potential disclosure. I didn't go all in, just enough to make it count if I was right. And I was right. But money wasn't the point. Protection was. Once the trade settled, I opened my file archive. Inside were years of truth, PDFs, spreadsheets, internal memos, log timestamps. I printed all of it, 93 pages in total, on thick, acid-free paper. I inserted them into a slim black binder and labeled it in plain black ink. C&B, Ledger Review, Confidential. Next, I drafted a 1-page summary of key findings in bullet point format. Each line referenced a document in the binder by page number and title. At the bottom, I wrote by hand, "In the event of my disappearance, this file is to be submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission under Whistleblower Code 7.2b. I have done nothing wrong. I have only preserved the record." I sealed the binder in a waterproof envelope. Then I added a digital thumb drive copy, encrypted and signed with my personal hash. Early the next morning, I walked into a local bank branch I'd never used before, dressed in jeans and a sweater. I looked like any other client. "I'd like to rent a safe deposit box," I told the clerk. She handed me a form. 15 minutes later, I followed her into the secure vault room, box number 147, just big enough. As she closed the steel door, I felt something strange settle in my chest. Not fear, not relief, certainty. Back home. I brewed tea. My laptop was off. My phone was silenced. There were no Slack messages, no conference calls, no dashboards blinking red. Just the quiet hum of an old ceiling fan and the ticking of a clock I hadn't noticed in years. I pulled out my notebook and wrote 5 short lines. 1. I saw everything. 2. I documented it. 3. I protected it. 4. I planned ahead. 5. And they don't know. Then I closed the book. The truth no longer lived only in my head or on a screen. It was safe, somewhere behind 6 inches of steel, untouchable. I turned off the light, slid under the blanket, and for the first time in weeks, I slept. When I woke at 5:30 a.m., the world outside my window was still asleep, cloaked in that quiet, pre-dawn hush where everything feels suspended. Time, consequence, even fear. But inside me, something had shifted. This wasn't about vengeance, not anymore. This was about something quieter, heavier, a responsibility that no longer let me sit still. After all I'd seen, after all I'd gathered, not acting would make me complicit. So I got up, brewed a small cup of coffee, opened the window just enough to feel the sharp edge of morning air. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and powered up the laptop I'd used for the past 2 months to document the company's corruption. I opened the official whistleblower submission portal for the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. I had bookmarked it weeks ago, but never clicked it. Until now. No name, no address, no login, just the truth. I uploaded the 93-page report. Each page included time-stamped metadata, indexed attachments, and a cross-referenced list of violations tied to federal compliance laws. Attached were PDF evidence of the shadow payroll system, screenshots of offshore wire transfers, logs confirming override access by unapproved personnel salary reduction codes, including my own SRX-03 reclassification visual charts showing nepotism-based bonus distribution. I bundled the documents into a zip file, encrypted it with AES 256 encryption, and included the hash value to prove it hadn't been altered. I hovered my cursor over the final Submit button for a second, then clicked 6:02 a.m. I closed my eyes and exhaled, not from relief, but from certainty. But I wasn't finished. I reopened a secure browser and logged into an encrypted ProtonMail account I'd created years ago. Observer, ChatKT7 at protonmail.com. There was one more person who needed to see this. His name was Nate Beringer, a financial journalist for the National Ledger. 5 years ago, Nate had broken a story that sent a small tech firm into bankruptcy after uncovering embezzlement and offshore laundering. What no one ever knew was, I had been his anonymous source. Back then. I'd fed him 3 server logs and 2 masked identities from inside Carrick and Belden's third-party vendor team. I never asked for credit, just change. Nate never exposed me, never even tried to trace me, and he'd earned something rare in my world, my trust. So now, I typed only this. You once exposed the unseen. What I'm sending you now is bigger. It's real, it's provable, and it's happening inside Carrick and Belden. No contact, no follow-up. Just read the files. Attached to the email was a clean, restructured version of the SEC report, scrubbed of any identifiers that might trace back to me. It had been renamed CB Structure SAW Violations 7x.pdf at the bottom of the email. I typed 3 letters, KTW. I hit send. I didn't shake, I didn't cry, I didn't second guess. Instead, I poured the rest of my coffee and walked over to the living room window. The sky had softened from black to indigo. A low hum of delivery trucks echoed in the distance. Life was stirring. The world was waking. And somewhere, deep in the federal inbox of the SEC, and maybe on the personal laptop of a journalist who once believed me. The truth was blinking to life. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Some alarms ring in silence before they ever scream. 10 days after I hit submit, the silence was louder than I expected. I went through the motions like any ordinary person. Groceries, emails, laundry, my sister's medical appointments. But underneath it all, I lived in a quiet hum of anticipation, like standing on the edge of a lake, waiting for the first ripple after tossing a stone. I didn't check my inbox obsessively. I didn't refresh the news every hour. I just waited. Because I knew the stone would hit. The only question was how loud the splash would be. That answer came on the 11th morning. I was halfway through grinding coffee beans when my phone lit up. First 1 notification, then 5. Then 11. A message from an old colleague read, "Turn on the news. You did something, didn't you?" I dropped the scoop, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and grabbed the remote. The banner on the bottom of the screen read, "Breaking. Carrick and Belden, stock frozen, pending federal investigation." There it was. The anchor's voice was calm, professional, but the undertone was unmistakable: scandal. They cited a formal notice from the SEC, confirming the temporary freeze of all Carrick and Belden trading activity while a forensic audit was underway. Alleged issues: off-book payroll, improper executive compensation, unreported offshore transfers. I stood in the middle of my kitchen, heart pounding, not in fear, but in sheer, electrified alertness. It had begun. By noon, just Carrick and Belden was trending. Industry blogs picked up the freeze. Financial Twitter was on fire. Then came the leaked emails. Dozens of screenshots appeared online, shared by anonymous staffers and insiders. Internal panic was on full display. Who accessed this data? Has IT locked the old archive system? Legal wants names now. If this spreads, we lose board confidence. I recognized the tone, not damage control. Desperation. By 3 p.m., the CEO, Brent Addington, hosted an emergency all-hands meeting via Zoom. Someone, bless their soul, leaked a recording within the hour. Kaylin Thorne didn't need a front-row seat. I sat in a cafe downtown, earbuds in, sipping a warm chai as I watched Brent blink nervously at his webcam. "We're aware of the SEC's inquiry and are cooperating fully," he said. "We want to reassure our stakeholders that this is a temporary misunderstanding. All internal systems are secure, and no wrongdoing has been identified at this time." But the sweat above his collar betrayed the script. The chat window in the Zoom lit up like fireworks. Why were we not told sooner? Is this about payroll or stock manipulation? Is Daniel Pierce still employed? That last one hung in the air for a moment, because just minutes before the meeting, something even bigger had dropped. The National Ledger released an exclusive report by Nate Beringer. Headline in bold, "Shadow Firms, Real Money, CFO linked to offshore entities amid investigation." There it was. Daniel Pierce, CFO of Carrick and Belden, was now publicly named as a registered director of 3 shell companies operating out of the British Virgin Islands. One of those companies, Veritone Holdings, had received over $2.2 million in consulting fees from Carrick in the past fiscal year. Nate's article included financial documents, transfer slips, and corporate registration records. Clear. Sourced. Undeniable. The same $2.2 million I had traced weeks ago. Seeing it out in the world, backed by independent confirmation, triggered something deep inside me. Not joy, not triumph. Validation. I had been right. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't overstepped. I had seen what they wanted hidden, and I'd lit the fuse. As I packed up to leave the cafe, my phone buzzed again. A new message. Unknown sender. No contact. No signature. Just 5 words. "You weren't the only one." I stared at it for a moment. Was it Nate? Someone from inside Carrick? A board member? It didn't matter. What mattered was this. The truth had broken surface, and it couldn't be pushed back down. I stepped into the afternoon sun, slipping my phone into my coat pocket. For the first time in months, I wasn't carrying my laptop. I didn't need to. My work had already taken root. The hospital room was quieter than usual. Outside the window, the late afternoon sun spilled through in long golden beams, catching on the edge of the IV pole beside my sister's bed. She was resting, eyes closed, lips dry, the chemo making her bones feel like glass. But she'd insisted I bring the laptop anyway. "I want to see it," she whispered earlier. "I want to watch it fall." And so we waited. The Zoom recording of Carrick and Belden's emergency board meeting had already gone viral, but I pulled up a clean copy sent by someone I didn't know. maybe another insider, maybe someone who had been waiting, like me, for this moment. The video started. Brent Addington, the CEO, sat in a corner of his tastefully lit home office. Face tight, voice thin. The board members appeared in muted boxes along the top, stone-faced, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "Let's be clear," one of them said sharply. "This isn't just a misunderstanding. Did you or did you not know about the offshore entities registered under Daniel Pierce's name?" Addington stammered. I was only made aware recently, this morning." "Actually," someone scoffed audibly. Another director leaned forward. "You're asking us to believe the CFO set up shell companies overseas, funneled millions through consulting invoices, and you just missed it?" The CEO swallowed hard. "The investigation is ongoing. We are cooperating fully." It wasn't enough. You could feel the unraveling happening in real time. Words like misalignment, fiduciary breach, and executive liability were tossed around like confetti at a corporate funeral. Brent's voice cracked. His forehead glistened with sweat. Behind me, I heard a quiet breath. I turned. My sister was watching, eyes steady, though her body trembled slightly under the thin hospital blanket. She smiled, weakly, but there it was. "You did the right thing," she said. My throat tightened. This was never about revenge. Not really. It was about the bonuses they stripped when I needed them most. About working 60-hour weeks only to be told I was replaceable. About watching unqualified people rise on connections while we were told to be grateful. And it was about her. Always about her. She had been the one holding the family together long before I ever understood what sacrifice meant. I looked back at the screen. The meeting was spiraling. Brent was being asked to step aside pending investigation. One member even suggested freezing his severance. Another demanded a full external audit of every executive hire in the past 3 years. It was all crashing down. Not because I screamed, but because I whispered, and whispered to the right places. Later that evening, after the meeting ended, I opened my investment dashboard. I hadn't looked at it since the freeze. I'd been too focused on the investigation, on keeping my sister stable, on staying invisible, but now, I needed to know. The chart was almost comical. Carrick and Belden's stock had dropped 61% in 10 days, and the put options I bought months ago, the ones I carefully layered at strategic intervals, waiting for this moment, had bloomed like fireworks. Total gains, $1.3 million. I didn't move for a while, just stared at the number, $1.3 million. Enough to pay every bill, every treatment, clear the mortgage, buy silence, if I wanted it, or freedom, if I chose that instead. I thought I'd cry, or laugh, but what came instead was something quieter, something cleaner. Relief. Not for the money itself, but for the justice of it, for the truth that had taken root and finally found air. I closed the laptop and reached for my sister's hand. She was asleep now, mouth slightly open, one hand resting on her stomach. Her skin was pale, but peaceful. On the tray beside her sat an envelope, the latest hospital invoice, $32,140.16. I placed my other hand on it gently and whispered, "It's covered." The sun had lowered outside, casting a soft amber glow through the blinds. I stayed there a long time, watching the light fade. Tomorrow, I'll call the accountant, I thought. Today, I'll just sit beside her. Because sometimes justice doesn't look like courtrooms or headlines. Sometimes it looks like a quiet hospital room, a still hand in yours, and a balance finally restored. I never wanted fame, not when the headlines exploded, not when the board crumbled, and certainly not when the whistleblower hotline started getting mentioned in congressional hearings, a month after Carrick and Belden fell under federal investigation. I moved into a small brick office space 2 blocks from a community college. No nameplate outside, no receptionist, just a fresh coat of white paint. 2 desks, and one purpose, on a foggy Tuesday morning. I opened the door and flipped the sign to open for the first time. Second Ledger Consulting. Restoring trust in numbers. I didn't need revenge. I needed to make sure this didn't happen to another company. Or to someone like me. My first client was a mid-sized biotech startup. One of their engineers had quietly flagged a misappropriated bonus pool, but HR buried the claim. The founder came to me directly after hearing about the whistleblower scandal. I reviewed their financial structure, helped them install a shadow-resistant auditing trail, and implemented a whistleblower protection pipeline with timed evidence encryption. They didn't even blink when I said I worked alone. They just said, "We need someone who's seen how deep it can go." By the third week, I'd hired someone to help, a bright young woman named Noelle, who used to handle internal audits at C&B. She had been quietly laid off when she asked why the CEO's niece had a bonus package larger than the CTO's. We didn't talk much about the past. We didn't have to. Late one Friday, Noelle had already gone home when I found a plain white envelope in our mail slot. No return address, no markings. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a single item, a pen. Polished. Heavy. Familiar. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but when I turned it over, my breath caught. K. Thorne was engraved along the barrel, elegant and deep. I hadn't seen that pen in over a year. It was the one they gave me after 15 years of service, the one that sat proudly on my desk until Ken took it, without a word. The same week he reassigned me to support. I never got it back. Until now, no note, no initials, no sign of who had sent it. But I didn't need one. Somewhere in the ruins of that old office, someone had found it, cleaned it, and chosen to return it, not as a token of apology, but as a quiet recognition that truth had its place again. I sat down and held the pen for a long time. Not everything broken can be fixed, but some things can be reclaimed. I didn't frame the pen. I didn't display it. I placed it carefully in my drawer and locked it away, not because I was trying to forget, but because I finally could. Outside the window, students passed by in clumps, backpacks slung over one shoulder, talking about things like equity in startups and ethical compensation structures. One paused, pointed at the second ledger sign, and snapped a photo. I smiled. This wasn't a revolution, but it was a start. Sometimes, justice doesn't arrive with sirens or applause. Sometimes, it arrives in silence, in the return of a pen, in the freedom to build again, in a whisper that says, "You were never wrong to speak up." Thank you for watching Kaylin's story all the way through. If you've ever been made to feel small, unseen, or silenced, her quiet fight is for you. Comment below if her journey moved you, like if you believe truth matters. Share this story with someone who's been wronged in silence, and subscribe to our channel for more real, raw stories like this one, where justice doesn't shout, but it never forgets.